For the second time in 3 games, the Celtics just absolutely went ice cold in the second half. First time it was against the Thunder. Second time it was against the Kings. So what do? I've drafted my boy Brendan Nunes that covers the Kings, and we're going to talk about it. Brendan, how do you feel actually watching the Kings beat the Celtics?
I was surprised. First off, what's up, Adam? Thanks for having
Was
me on,
good.
man. We've done plenty of work before. I was surprised. The Kings were riding a 5-game win streak, but no De'Aaron Fox in this one, even though it looked like he might come back for it. Didn't end up being the case, and the Kings still took care of business. I mean, their 3-point defense from Sacramento's perspective has been pretty bad all year long. And the Celtics, obviously, kind of how they make their money, shooting almost 40 or almost 50 a game, and hold them to 11 of 41 from three certainly helps a lot. Domas Sabonis has a huge night on the glass, a career high in rebounds there, and just a team-wide effort from the Kings, really. So I was surprised, but I did also feel like the Celtics kind of shot themselves in the foot a little bit in this one.
Yeah, I mean, their perimeter shots weren't good. You guys took 20 more 20 more shots in total. A lot of that came off turnovers. You had 16 second chance, 16 points off turnovers. Jason Tatum had 8 turnovers to himself. So you basically scored 2 on every Tatum turnover if you want to just create averages out of thin air. The problem for me was this, it feels like teams have got a legitimate blueprint on how to fluster this Celtics team. And it feels like that blueprint was laid out by the Warriors back in November. I think it was November 6th, when they just adjusted their pickup points to pick up Tatum or whoever the ball handler was around the logo, hedge hard on a screen. So then there was just somebody really pressuring to force an escape dribble. And then from there, you just close down airspace and force the Celtics into either a tough contested shot or funnel them into a collapsing defense. You guys did that really well. I think you've done a great job as a unit in shrinking the floor, so there was never too much room for players to drive into, but you were also closing out quickly enough and picking players up high enough that they had no choice but to try and drive. So you put them in this weird kind of dichotomy of where they could score and how they could create their shots. That to me was a problem all the way through the game. Is that the Kings' usual defense, or do you feel like they just followed the blueprint that's been working recently?
It was a little bit different. I would say that they put a lot of emphasis. They used the term hot guys coming into games, which I always find to be a little bit of funny terminology because I'm a child. But that those are the hard closeouts, the guys that warrant being ran off the line. And obviously the Celtics have a lot of those, but not having a typical rim protector. The Kings do a lot of, trapping the box. You never know. Malik Monk, Kevin Huerter could be the guy that's the low man over there and responsible for protecting the rim. And because they don't have that typical rim protector, they're usually sort of overcorrecting in that aspect and do a decent job protecting the rim as a team, but therefore give up a lot of threes. And I think that they catered more towards defending the perimeter a little bit more last night. A lot of switching that was going on as well from both ends. I think that's what led to a lot of the Domas rebounds. But I would say it was a little bit different for the Kings. The full court pressure or half court, either way, I think has been a little bit new under Doug Christie. Keon Ellis is playing more, and he does a great job of doing that. Keegan Murray, I think, looked really good in that game on both ends of the floor, and he had been dealing with ankle inflammation since early mid-December and playing through it. And he had just said that he got about 100% healthy. So I think that factored in for sure, but it was a little bit of a different defense, I think, in just how much they were emphasizing running guys off of the line.
Yeah, and I think that when you ran them off the line, you guys did a great job of either collapsing or zoning up in space. There was a few zone possessions there, but didn't really seem to appear until after you'd already ran a guy off the line, and then you'd zone up. And it just forced a lot of isolation basketball. It forced a lot of contested twos. And it felt like, and Mazzulla spoke about this after the game, every time the Celtics missed and went back on defense, and then you guys would just find a way to score through like Sabonis DHOs on the wing or however else you were generating offense. The Celtics' confidence was slowly being chipped away, and then those difficult defensive possessions from you guys putting on like that pressure just led to more and more turnovers, more and more mistakes. Did you come away from this feeling like this Celtics team could win a championship this year?
I think they still have the talent. I think what stood out to me is them not capitalizing on like the DeMar only minutes, I guess you would say, when Malik Monk and Domantas Sabonis, especially without De'Aaron Fox, but Malik and Domas being the guys that really control the pace for the Kings. And then when it's a DeMar-led lineup, the pace just totally changes. And I thought in the first half, that end of the first, start of the second, that Boston did a great job taking advantage of that. Like you mentioned, them attacking mismatches. I thought that Tatum going at Kevin Huerter or Jalen going at Keon Ellis, even though I think Keon is a great defender and legit one of the better on ball defenders in the league, there's a size advantage there for sure. Trey Lyles is a guy that you can pick on in mismatches. Malik Monk's a guy you can pick on in mismatches. So I thought that they were sloppy offensively, but I thought that the game plan made sense for the most part. And I thought that the way that Boston took advantage of that stretch I'm talking about, end of first, start of second, that they probably should have done more so and could have at that start of the end of the third, start of the fourth. So I think that they absolutely have the talent. Obviously, I think it's just, it's a little bit of, as a guy that used to really, really watch the Celtics and has slowed down a lot of the conversation was making Tatum a playmaker, making Jalen a playmaker, and seeing how those guys can function. And they've taken a lot of steps in that aspect. But I think last night was a little bit more of a revert to the previous state where the playmaking doesn't look great when you try and make Tatum force him to set up everybody else.
And this was my biggest argument, was the lack of adjustments, right? So you guys, you run this, I like to call it the Warriors blueprint. You run the Warriors blueprint, you trap, you pick up high, you do X, Y, and Z. One of the counters that I've seen the Celtics do, and specifically last season before this blueprint was put in place, but we've seen it time to time here this season, is when teams are picking you up that high, start working out the post, start creating out of the post. Porzingis is just a walking post mismatch. He can create out of there. He can score for himself. He can do a bunch of different things. Brown has become one of the best fadeaway post scorers in the NBA. Obviously, you have a guy like that in DeMar too. And then Tatum's ability to create that way, bully guys, overpower them, do whatever. It's just you have this free-headed monster that can use that mid-range where teams often leave space to be able to generate offense either on the perimeter or around the rim. And I felt like how high you guys were pushing up, any post-entry passes would have really put your defense into a bind, and then you could have adjusted. You would have had to adjust, and the Celtics now have control of that little chess battle. But they didn't. They didn't adjust. I think that Tatum would have had far more impact working out of the post. I think we would have seen a bit more from Porzingis. And then at least the Celtics are forcing you guys to go back to a defense that you feel more comfortable with and you can adjust into. That to me was an issue. Just the lack of adjustment, and the fact that Tatum missed 6 minutes in the fourth was just you guys are going on a run and Missoula's like, no, this is the rotation and we're sticking to it. That was also a problem. So adjustments in general were a big issue for me. I thought you guys adjusted far better than what the Celtics did.
Yeah, the Kings definitely made their adjustments. Instead of closing with Keon, like Devin Carter, rookie who's in his fourth NBA game, who I think is going to be really good, by the way, had a 8-0 run by himself, or scored 8 straight for the Kings by himself at the start of the fourth, and then he runs with the closing lineup for a while before they eventually go to Trey Lyles. But outside of Trey Lyles and Keegan Murray, those are the only wings forwards that Sacramento has that are reliable on this roster. And even Trey Lyles can be a little bit questionable at times. He had a great night, obviously, against the Celtics, but I thought that the size, coming into the night, the size was the big difference in this matchup. And I thought that the Celtics definitely, to your point, could have capitalized that on that a bit more. Some of the switching that Sacramento's doing. I think Porzingis is a guy, obviously, that can attack mismatches at certain times. And I thought that's what had Jalen rolling in the first half, was guys were too small for him. And then obviously they kind of go away from that. But we mentioned earlier the Kings maybe emphasizing protecting the three a little bit more. I was surprised that didn't mean that they were giving up more on the inside, where I feel like Boston can take advantage, but obviously stylistically this year, they've been a little bit more of a perimeter team. The most in the league all time, really, I guess you would say. So take them out of their style a little bit obviously helps, but I do think that they have the talent to do what you're talking about, go inside a little bit more, especially against a smaller team like Boston.
Yeah, especially when, like I say, when you're zoning up more in the middle and you're shrinking that floor that way, going into the paint, going into the post, forcing that collapse early and then making reads out of it just made so much more sense to me. I've got a question. Celtics fans are starting to post this a bit on social, so I kind of want to put it to you as an outsider. The Celtics went to quite a bit of double big for you guys. Now, I've always been very big on for me, single big, especially with the way the Celtics team is designed. You've got a lot more of a fluidity in your offense, multiple ball handlers, 1 through 4 can handle the ball. You've got a floor space in 5. You're just more fluid, more there's more ways to attack a defense. When you go double big, you lose a ball handler, maybe two, but you add size and length. Maybe you can pressure the interior a bit more. Obviously, as you just said, the Celtics didn't really do much in the middle of the floor or around the paint. How did you feel about those double big lineups? Did you see that as like easy money for you guys locking down on defense? Was there any concerns there? Because to me, I feel like these double big lineups now are being leaned on too heavily. And again, you're losing some fluidity because you've got less ball handlers, less creators.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rebounding obviously played a big factor. 16 offensive rebounds for the Kings, and I would guess that some of Boston running those double bigs is you hope that you can help nullify that a little bit. But for the most part, I mean, mentioned it earlier, the Kings have a lot of mismatch guys out there, a lot of guys that are easy to attack. And I think that when you have more perimeter creators, more of those, what's typical in smaller lineups, guys that can put the ball on the deck and take advantage of mismatches, then eventually you're going to swing to a guy that is in an advantageous situation. And with how Boston's roster is, probably someone that you trust to try to capitalize on that. So I thought that was kind of playing into Sacramento's favor a little bit as a team that, we feel like it was going to be able to keep up offensively, but are you going to be able to slow Boston down? And I think if they would have gone to what I view as more of a dynamic lineup with some of those smaller things, that could have given them a little bit more trouble as we're talking about, being able to get into the paint. But I think even if it's attacking a hard closeout and getting paint touches and spray triples from there and things like that, I thought that small lineups probably would have helped Boston a little bit more in that game, especially. I mean, I know we talked about the lack of size that Sacramento has, but I think that the mismatches are really something that they could have capitalized on more, and they definitely tried to. It just wasn't the most efficient.
You know what's bothering me? That's not being spoke about a lot, but I feel like it should have benefited Boston, and the Kings aren't receiving like the praise that they should get. Is you guys did this without De'Aaron Fox on the floor, and you've done this. What is that now? 5 straight wins without De'Aaron Fox or something along those lines.
6 straight wins, 3 of them without Fox.
There we go. I think the Celtics losing this game was one thing. The way they lost in the second half was very reminiscent of what happened, one, against the Warriors. Again, I keep pointing that game out because to me, that was when the blueprint was set. But it was also reminiscent of the way they lost to the Thunder. And the fact that you managed to shut them down, do what you guys did on offense, specifically through like Sabonis, but you did it without De'Aaron Fox, right? And the fact that you guys could have been more potent offensively. I don't know whether the defense would have held up the same way with Fox there. But, man, do you feel like you guys are turning a corner right now?
It's interesting. There's commentary going on about Fox for sure and about the Kings potentially being better. And I don't think that's going on in Sacramento quite as much because you look at that 19-point second quarter or the 23-point third quarter, and it's like there were clearly stretches where Fox would have helped the Kings. I think, again, the DeMar only minutes were really gross, and DeMar only meaning no Malik or Domantas Sabonis. But he has 12 points on 5 of 20 in the first 3 quarters, and then he has 12 points on 4 of 6 in the fourth quarter, like very typical DeMar DeRozan throughout this season. The Kings are, I mean, no question, better with De'Aaron Fox on the floor. I think he's easily their best player. The stylistic aspect that I mentioned of like them playing fast is a lot of that has to do with they think they have the fastest guy in the league in De'Aaron Fox, and having a guy like Domas that can get boards taking himself. And there's other guys that play into that, but team's definitely better without Fox. I think on both ends of the floor, honestly. It's just they made 18 threes last night, and they were the first of 50-50 balls. They look like they wanted it a little bit more out there. And when you're making that many threes, especially in a season where they've really struggled to knock down threes throughout most of this year, it helps that in this 6-game streak, 2 of them, they shot above 40% from 3. You're 18 of 47 against Boston as a third one in there. Not quite 40%, but that 38 definitely is helpful. When you get, Keegan Murray back to his form, it obviously helps a lot. He's knocking down threes after barely hitting rim a lot of times earlier this season. It was pretty gross. Trey Lyles knocks some down. Devin Carter, like I mentioned, I think that 8-0 run that he had in the fourth quarter was really big. So other guys stepped up, I think, in, I guess you would say, atypical ways, a little bit better production than what you might expect night to night, specifically when it comes to knocking down threes. But this team definitely looks even better with De'Aaron Fox on the floor. So I think obviously an encouraging sign for the Kings and trending in the right direction. But it's, I see why it's an interesting note considering all the conversation that's gone on around Fox and his agency and all that's taken place this season.
It's not even just an interesting note from a Kings point of view. It's an interesting note from a Celtics point of view, because right now, what are they? I think I wrote it out earlier. So on today's newsletter, I put they're 11-8 over their last 19 games. Eye test is telling us that they're struggling defensively. They're struggling to generate the quality open threes that we've seen before. They're struggling to generate good offense in total. Yet the numbers tell us that they're, let me read this through, third in the NBA for net rating. They're third in the NBA for defensive rating and fourth in the NBA for offensive rating since December 1st. But they've been punked they've not been punked 8 times. They've been punked about 3 times over the last 6 weeks. And I feel like the third time was last night against a team missing their star player, against a team that played a defensive system that they weren't 100% comfortable with, and that have no full-time head coach and question marks hanging over the head of their franchise cornerstone. So, like, when you put all that together and you guys still shut down the Celtics in the second half, the reigning champions, you still find ways to control the glass. You find ways to control the tempo of the game for the most part. Celtics were playing Kings basketball more than they was playing Celtics basketball. To me, you guys came in, took control of the game early, never let go of the rope. And with everything that's going on, that was very impressive to me.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the changes, is that as much as I don't think Mike Brown was the problem, there's been a tone change and I think an energy shift. I actually referenced the Jaylen Brown tweet from when they made the finals the first year and played Golden State, where he said the energy is shifting and everything kind of changed afterwards.
I was listening to
kind of
that
jokingly
episode.
reference that a lot with this Kings team right now. I think the energy has kind of shifted under Doug Christie, and one of the things was getting off to slow starts under Mike Brown, and I think that they've really emphasized doing that a little bit differently, trying to set the tone early. And I think that you've seen that for sure. And, it's obviously helped the Kings a lot. But I really did think that beginning of the fourth, end of the third, beginning of the fourth, that Boston was about to make it a game again. And I know I mentioned it a couple of times. I thought Devin Carter's little run there to keep it at arm's length made a big difference. But it felt like the whole time Boston was probably going to bring it back. And maybe that's just from a Kings perspective, where this is a team that's played a whole lot of close games throughout the course of this season. But 38 points in that fourth quarter, man, for the Kings is enough, obviously, to keep your distance and secure that win. But they've had a different energy to them. And I think that there is still a remaining belief in this team. And again, as much as I don't think Mike Brown was the one necessarily at fault for this team, I think Doug Christie deserves a lot of credit for keeping them together and a level of belief in this group that still exists, because they have a lot of talent. I think their issue is more so a roster imbalance, where I talked about earlier, Keegan Murray, Trey Lyles, the only reliable wings forwards on this team. And if you want to say like two-way reliable, it's really just Keegan Murray. So I think that they do need help there, but they've been playing good basketball. And if there's anything that you can't question, the talent level I think that this Kings team has, specifically on the offensive end. And I think that you saw that rolling last night.
Last question. I'm going to let you get out of here because I like to keep these to about 20 minutes. What was if you're looking at it from a Celtics perspective, somebody that's an outsider again, somebody that was an insider, you watched every Celtics game, you've missed the best part of the last 20 years worth of Celtics basketball, 16 years of Celtics basketball.
Yeah, I got out at the wrong time for sure.
Yeah, man. Like the best part of the last 15 years, we could say, or whatever, however you want to put it, since 2008. What shocked you the most? Was it their offensive struggles or their defensive struggles?
I would probably say offensively. I think how gross it was attacking those mismatches, because again, I've watched plenty of instances where after Keon Ellis, it was Kevin Huerter that was guarding Jaylen Brown. And I think Kevin gets more crap than maybe he deserves, because it's a prime example. He gets asked to do more than he probably should. There's no reason that Kevin Huerter should be guarding Jaylen Brown. Trey Lyles is an easy mismatch. Malik Monk is an easy mismatch. Like, you can kind of go down the line a little bit with some of the guys on this Kings roster. And I thought that the execution in dealing with those mismatches was pretty bad from Jaylen and Jason throughout the course of this. The 8 turnovers for Tatum definitely stood out. It felt like a handful of them were before he even got the ball across half court, just kind of dealing with pressure and pesty guys. But yeah, I think that it just didn't feel like the biggest surprise to me was the difference in threes. again, coming in as a Celtics Kings team that has struggled to defend a three all season long, and they haven't made very many of their own. I thought just the math of it, it's going to be hard for them to keep up in this game. And obviously, it really goes polar opposite here, where they actually shoot 6 more threes than Boston.
And
so
knock them down more at a much higher clip.
Yeah, I would say the Kings offense impressed me because I thought they were rolling, but the disappointing side, I think, would be more so Boston sort of shooting themselves in the foot with all those turnovers. I do think the 50-50 balls made a big difference too. I mean, the 16 offensive rebounds definitely plays a big part. And so just, I think showing a little bit more heart than the defending champs is definitely encouraging, but they didn't do themselves, they being the Celtics, any favors offensively for sure.
Any favors on either end of the floor. And this is where I want to put it out to anyone watching. If you're a Celtics fan, what's your panic level at? Are you at 5, a 6, a 7, an 8? Where were you on December 1st to where are you now? How do you feel? I'm genuinely curious, so leave those comments.
Brandon, can I just add that the Kings had just lost 6 straight and then fired their head coach, and then they roll off 6 in a row. You know, like they're only one of many examples, but like I'm sure as you know, but just for listeners' perspective, like things change so fast. Look at how Milwaukee started the year. Golden State was like 12-3, and then they went 3-12 in their next games or something like that. Like Phoenix has done a total nosedive after being towards the top of the West. So things change fast, you know?
Things change fast, but that's the problem because just a few months ago, this team was a championship team dominating the NBA, and now they're roughly a .500 team over the last 6 to 7 weeks. I'm not hitting the panic button just yet. I think they're going to figure things out, but my biggest concern is you always hear off these teams that won one championship, came in the next year and didn't win. And they're like, we didn't build winning habits. We didn't build enough winning habits. There was too many bad habits that crept in. My concern is we're seeing Boston's bad habits right now, and they're not being corrected. And if you don't correct them now, then come the playoffs, they're going to bite you in the ass. So Celtics fans, let me know where your panic level's at. Let me know what's pissing you off, what's making you happy. Brendan, where can everyone show you some love, man?
Yeah, appreciate you having me on, man. SacTownsports.com is all the written stuff, and it's at Brendan Nunes NBA on socials. Thank you.
Shows Brendan some love because he's been around on anything I do for years. If you're new here, then you probably don't know me either. Show me some love, hit subscribe to the newsletter. If you've been here a while, peace out, catch you next time.